If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high-quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Good morning, Brother Low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by Lukas Harkins. He does such great work over at HXCBB, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. We're going to be chatting with him about what we've seen here in the Big East in the offseason. Certainly Butler is a team that he covers very well. They've been a team of intrigue. What we've all seen in terms of the Big Ten and some of their movement, how he gauges these fits that we're going to be seeing in the transfer portal as well. So he's working on a little bit of a, shall we say, research assignment as to what can determine whether or not the guy that averages like 15 points per game can move up a level, or the guy that didn't see a lot of playing time at the higher level can move down a level. We're going to be chatting about that, some of the attributes that he looks at on that front, and then in the final segment, I'm going to get you guys a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball on Thursday. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GUNet_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, maybe does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Well, I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today. Everything is brought to you by EdgeBoost. Over at EdgeBoost, they're making sure that bettors are able to access their funds 24/7, 365, and on leap years, 366 days out of the year, because they are not some sort of a site that's running on credit or anything like that. They're making sure that bettors are just able to access their funds at any time that they need them to for all their gambling-related transactions. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, utilize that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That gets you a $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's chat with our good friend Lukas Harkins. Does amazing work over at HXCBB. He is a great bracketologist as well. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at Hardwired Sports all together. And Lukas, it's great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks always for having me on.
Always good to have you aboard, Lukas. And Lukas, how about it first things first? We take a look at a team and a conference that you know oh so well in the Big East and what Butler has been able to do this offseason, because I've been saying this on the podcast. I've been really impressed by what a lot of these, shall we say, lesser teams out there in the Big East have been able to do, because we're all focused on what is going to be happening with St. John's, what's going to be happening with Villanova, what have you. But I do feel like those mid-tier teams, I mean, other than Seton Hall, I'm not loving what they're doing. I think that all these teams have done a solid job. And take me through what Butler has been able to do this offseason, because I do think that there's a chance that they return to prominence.
Yeah, it's really interesting, I would say, especially in the backcourt, bringing back Finley Bizjack after what was a really, really strong second half to his sophomore season. He was a really highly touted recruit by Butler standards coming out of high school, either top 100 or near top 100. Played some as a freshman, was really inconsistent, didn't shoot the ball well, kind of felt like a little more of the same to start his sophomore year. And then down the stretch, he really started shooting the ball really, really well, cutting well, playing as a de facto point guard on a team that really didn't have a point guard necessarily last season. This year, he'll be able to slide into more of a combo two-guard kind of role next to Jalen Jackson coming in from Fort Wayne, who's a really, really talented scorer, really good in the pick and roll, gets downhill and finishes at the rim at a really high rate. I think that Jackson and Bizjack really form a dynamic kind of backcourt for Butler this season. They bring in Michael Jai from Gonzaga, had a really good year the year before that. Played a little bit more of a role player at Gonzaga when he was on the floor, but gives them really a defensive edge. And what's most important for Butler is he's a really tremendous rebounder, which is an area where Butler's going to need a lot of help this season, is particularly on the glass. And that kind of leads into the 5 spots, the question mark, I think. You bring in Drayton Jones from South Carolina State, bring in Yohan Traore from SMU, but there isn't really anything else besides those two at the 5. And those two, I mean, either don't have experience at the high major level and with Jones, or Traore has been a mixed bag to this point in his career. This will be his 4th team in 4 years. So I think the 5 spot's a bit of a question mark, but that backcourt, Jackson and Bizjack, is really solid in my opinion. Bringing in Yame Butler from Drexel is not a bad ad. By Butler standards, this is a really strong freshman class coming in. I think that top 100 Stink Robinson at point guard's a local kid who could see some minutes behind Jackson and Bizjack in the backcourt. The guy I really like out of this class is Jackson Keith. I think he could play some solid minutes at the 3 or the 4 for Butler, kind of combine the 2 through 4 for them, kind of depending on lineups, kind of in a similar mold to what they might see out of Jamie Kaiser coming back after missing all last season from transferring in from Maryland.
Yep, I think that those are going to be just so many key pieces for them. You mentioned Kaiser. He's a little bit of an out of sight, out of mind guy. And just how do you take a look at the entire landscape of the Big East? Because I make the argument that most of these teams have gotten a whole heck of a lot better. I do think that even though there are some people I would lukewarm on Mr. Kevin Bullard heading on over to Villanova, I don't think that there's any debate that he's going to be able to provide a little bit more than Kyle Neptune was able to. Again, I'm not necessarily in on Seton Hall. I feel like they need to add some more shooting. And this offseason, somehow, some way, they're still avoiding bringing in shooting. But really, other than Seton Hall, I look at all these teams, I feel like they made some relatively solid adds, other than obviously Marquette, who they've got the just lone soldier approach at this point of not bringing in anyone via the transfer portal.
Yeah, I feel like this is the time of year where we always underrate Marquette because they're not doing anything. And that's kind of the case again. It's just like everyone else is adding talent, and Marquette's just like, well, we've had ours, and they'll rise up. So I think Marquette's going to be fine as a team out of, like, as you were saying, with Jamie Kaiser as an individual for Butler. Marquette's kind of an outside, out of mind transfer class because there just isn't one. But it's a program that's been consistently rock solid. St. John's and UConn look awesome. Potential preseason top 5 teams in the country. I really like what Creighton's done with its transfer class. I think Owen Freeman's a really good fit for them when he's healthy and good to go. But I think you're right. Outside of that St. John's and UConn spot at the top, you can go every different ways with how these transfers fit together. I think right now there's a lot of talent that each team has added, and it's just, I think, going to come down to which coach does the best job putting the right pieces together. Because, on paper we can talk about, oh, so-and-so averaged this and shot this and this from three or from the field, but it matters on how those guys coexist together. That's really, really hard to pinpoint at this time of year. And arguably it's hard to pinpoint until December or January, but that's when conference play starts, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And you're speaking my language right now. As joining me on the show, we do have Lukas Harkins. He does such a tremendous job over at He Checks CBB. And I know he did some work over at the Field of 68 with the bracketology shows as well. Joining me right here on Coast Soups. And you just spoke my language right there, because we always look at some of these guys being like, oh, average 15 points per game. He should be great at this school. Oh, this guy only averaged 7 points per game. He's going to be absolutely awful. And sometimes the guy that averaged 7 points per game turns out to be the best transfer ever, and the guy that averaged 15 points per game is just awful in general. And how do you try to be able to gauge a little bit of this? Because there's no exact science. There's no way of knowing exactly what you're going to be getting. But are there some sort of clues that you take a look at as to a guy's success and how they're going to do as they're transferring to a new program? Because I always find it to be interesting to try to be able to look at angles for these guys that will not pan out at their new school.
Yeah, I'm actually working on a project on that right now to see if I can find any sort of consistency over the past 3 or 4 years in the major transfer boom, to see what's been the most successful in that regard, especially over low and mid-major jumps to high major. But right now, when I don't have that data in front of me because I haven't finished it, what I look for right now is I look at the coach. Who's coaching your team? What have they done statistically well as a head coach over the last 5 or 6 years? Is there something that they consistently rank high in X category or Y category? And then I try and look at their transfers and see which of those guys really fit in that mold, and see, like, oh, there's a clear role here that they do this well. Like, for example, like as I was talking about Jalen Jackson being a really good pick and roll guy for Butler runs a fair amount of pick and roll. So putting him in situations where he's at his best to get downhill and do that, I think allows an easier transition for guys who are playing a similar role to where they did at their last school where they were successful. Because to your point, it's hard for guys who average 15, 20 points a game at the low, mid-major level when they're not asked to take that many shots at the next level. Is at the high major level, is it easier to just settle into a role and increase your efficiency, or did you need those shots to really get into a rhythm as the season progresses? It's hard to really put into concept how quickly these guys' roles change, not just from school to school, but even within the first few weeks of a season at a high major school, when those coaches are still trying to figure out those rotations because it's the first time they're seeing them against other guys. But as far as projecting it out, the best we can do, from my perspective, the best I can do, is try to find what coaches do well and what they prioritize, and whether those players that they've added this year are just numbers that have been productive, or if they're numbers that have been productive and fit stylistically with what the coach usually does.
Yep, I'm right there with you. And I also think that the conference itself is very interesting as well, because for the longest of time, it always felt like in the Big Ten, you had 14 teams that played with a very clunky big man, and they were all like 300th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, so you knew what you were going to get there. In the Big East, I think that you'd agree with me. A lot of teams that play a little bit of a slower tempo, though we have seen a few teams be able to crank it up just a little bit more, and I think that that's interesting as well, because a guy that might be like a dynamo three-point shooter out there in the Summit League, and I think that that's a good example. We've seen a few guys over at Butler and other places in the Big East transfer in from the Summit League. They don't necessarily have that same level of success because the game out there in the Big East very different from that of the Summit League.
Absolutely. It's a whole transition from not just the level of competition, but also the types of systems you're playing against and the type of system you're playing in. Obviously, there are teams that do things differently at various levels. There are leagues that shoot the ball better from three than others. There are leagues that try to turn you over more than others. There's leagues that play more zone, leagues that play more man. And I think that there's a reason why we're the ones we talk about the games, and the reason why the coach is the one scouting the players and watching the film and getting the guys that they think will fit what they do. There's a reason why we're here and they're on the sidelines, right?
Yep, there certainly is. And when you do have a guy try to go from radio into coaching, we see how that typically goes as well. So let that be a word to the wise there. And I do think that it is interesting to take a look at all that. But additionally, how these new coaches are going to be doing as well, because we're seeing one or two out there in the Big East. Obviously, what the younger Patino is going to be doing over at Xavier is very much top of mind. What we're going to be seeing out of Kevin Willard as well. And I thought that these were two solid hires. Again, I know that there's some love for Kevin Willard. There's some hate for Kevin Willard. Depends upon who you are there. But I don't think that there's any debating that that's an upgrade for them. I think that with Xavier, they've just had a home run of an offseason with bringing in Richard Pitino and bringing in all the talent that they've had via the portal.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think both hires are solid. I think the Villanova start to the transfer portal maybe hasn't been the most positive for Kevin Willard and maybe the projections for this coming season. But as far as what he's done as a coach, obviously he's coming off a successful season at Maryland and he had success at Seton Hall. I think that Xavier, it just kind of feels like whoever they hire, they're going to be good. They've had really, really strong success with coaches over the years. Even like the Sean Miller part 1 or part 2 or Chris Mack, all those guys have had success there. And I think Patino is the guy that, was due for a second shot at a high major job, as we've seen with Minnesota since he was gone. I think that that's a tougher job than perhaps was given credit at the time. Coming off of his successful run too, I think that he goes to an infrastructure that's built for college basketball success at Xavier. And I think that his dad was right in saying, it's Xavier, you take that job, because I think they're definitely in right position to be a successful program for the next several years.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I think that was a very good job that he took. And I do think that moving forward, we're going to be seeing Xavier have some very good seasons under Mr. Patino. As joining me on the show, we do have one of our good friends, Lukas Harkins. He does such great work over at HXCBB. Joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, and I do think that those two hires were solid, but are there a few other ones that really stand out to you that you feel like they just flat out were able to get it right? Because I do think that out there in the Big Ten, they were able to do a solid job with some of their hires, and these mid-major schools that they decided to hire on the D2 guys, like I look at Denver, for example, I thought that they did a pretty solid job with their search as well.
Yeah, I think the one that I'm really looking at is North Texas. I think they're on a really good run of hiring good coaches here, kind of back to back to back. Grant McCasland was obviously very successful. Ross Hodge, successful. I think Daniel Robinson is quite good coming in from Cleveland State. I think he's a very good coach. I think he's had a good staff with Cleveland State. They've been successful. I think he's an identity kind of coach that I think will follow really well to North Texas. I think that that's a program that can continue to play at a pretty high level now in what's going to be year 3 in the American this coming season.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I do think that out there with North Texas, they just know how to be able to hire on coaches. And we've seen it with Utah State. Fortunately, they didn't have to replace their coach this offseason, but felt like for 5 straight off seasons, they had to replace their coach. And every single time they were able to bring in a great coach themselves. And how do you take a look at a conference out there in the Mountain West that we did see a lot of turnover with them? Because I do think that one of the more underrated ads in the offseason was Josh Pastner over at UNLV. And he has hit the portal in a way that I did not think that he was going to. He's brought in a lot of talent. They're a team that I'm very bullish on. And even Colorado State with Ali Faroukmanesh coming in, he's replacing Nico Medved, who I thought that was a great hire for Minnesota. And I feel like the Mountain West, under the radar, has had a really good offseason, despite the fact that they did lose a few of their coaches.
Yeah, I think you hit it with Colorado State. I think for both those guys, I think it's a great hire for Minnesota to have Nico Medved now in tow there. I think he's a great fit for them and needed a good fit there. And I think Ali was ready for a head coaching job. And if there's any place for it, it's the place that he's really helped to build in Colorado State. I think they are going to be continuing successful as I believe it's conference change coming up, right?
Yep, it's going to be a conference change for them as we've got the newest iteration of the Pac-12 that's going to be coming up, and it's going to be interesting to say the least. I think that they've only got 10 schools right now, so hopefully they go back to the Pac-10 and it can give us just reminiscing days of Isaiah Thomas and what he was able to do in one of those last Pac-12 tournaments. So I think that that's going to be a lot of fun to take a look at. But yep, there's going to be a lot of intrigue there. And there's just a lot of intrigue in general in college basketball. And is there a transfer class or two that you take a look at that in your opinion is a little bit of a cut above everyone else? And have you been taking a look at some of these schools, and is there just one or two in general that you just feel like perhaps they deserve a little bit more love than what they've gotten for the guys that they brought in?
I think Wisconsin's been pretty quiet in terms of usually they've been they're usually not that active in the transfer portal, despite the fact that they've had a fair number of success with transfers in the past couple of years. Obviously, AJ Storr was very good for them. John Tanjay this year was very good. I think that their class is pretty solid as a transfer class this season. I think that they'll get a little, that class will get a little underrated because the star of the group's the returner and John Blackwell coming back. But Nick Boyd's a solid player. Andrew Rohde is a Wisconsin kid coming back after spending the last year at Virginia, kind of took another step forward there in his second year there. Austin Rapp coming in from Portland's good. A quietly good class from a program that hasn't usually brought in a ton of transfers. I like what they're doing there. As far as top-end transfer classes, you don't have to look that much further than what you're looking at St. John's. They bring in Ian Jackson, Bryce Hopkins, Isaiah Sellers. Like that class is loaded. Dylan Darling, I really like, is what's probably going to be a bench piece for them. I think that they're going to be loaded as they have been. And BYU also has obviously put together some pretty strong talent, I think, with Robert Wright and Kennard Davis coming in to play that backcourt for AJ in the front court.
Yep, absolutely. And BYU right now one of the finest teams that money can buy, as they have really dipped into that NIL collective, and we dipped into our collective to be able to bring you in, Lucas. You kindly accepted, and you do such an amazing job being able to gauge this game that we all know and love of college basketball. Let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people are able to follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, thanks as always for having me on. You guys can find me at Hardwired Sports on X, formerly Twitter. Still hasn't gotten in my brain. Content's at heatcheckcollegebasketball.com, heatcheckcbb.com, and if you're looking for Butler-specific content, I have my own Patreon for the Dogs.
And he does a tremendous job on that front, taking a look at the Big East, taking a look at Butler, all things college basketball over there at HXCBB, and time again, one of the most consistent bracketologists that you're going to find in the game. So a big thanks to Lucas for joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Need to throw in their Milwaukee Bucks fan as well. We like those guys on this podcast. And what else we like on this podcast? Rounding up the news and notes that we see in college basketball. So let's take a look at the past 24 hours on the flip side.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Was great to be able to chat some college basketball and so much more with one of our good friends, Lukas Harkins, who does such amazing work over there at HeatCheckCBB. Much like myself, a Milwaukee Bucks fan and a man that has an affinity for the great state of Wisconsin. We like those guys on this podcast. So a big thanks to our good friend Lucas for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes that we've seen in college basketball the last 24 hours. And don't look now, but College of Charleston really putting together a nice offseason here as they're going to be picking up Mr. Dean. His first name is Mr., his last name is Dean. He commits to Charleston, and for Charleston, they have done an absolutely superb job of being able to put together some talent. I was mentioning this a few days ago, but they bring in Jalen Counter from Middle Tennessee, a nice double-figure score there. Kobe Duggan absolutely lit things ablaze out there in the Coastal Conference last season. Connor Hickman is coming in. Now you've got a guy, Mr. Dean, who he's not going to pop it and lock it from three-point range, but at 6'6", he does a little bit of everything. 15.5 points, 2 steals. He was able to do a nice job of being able to pull in their 5.5 rebounds per game, and he's a nice little bit of a combo guard for Charleston. It does feel like they've really become very well-rounded, and I love this pickup for them. Charleston looking like they're going to be rock solid out there in a very good Coastal Conference, so absolutely love that pickup there. You've got Jordan Dumont. He was over at Villanova last season. He has decided that he is going to be going to VCU. 6'8", little bit of a combo player that just could not really get out there on the floor in general for Villanova last season. He was averaging about 2 points per contest, played in 20 games, and he actually comes over, if I'm not mistaken, from the country of Canada is where he was playing at first. He wasn't necessarily a super-duper highly touted prospect or anything like that, but a guy that is able to space out the floor a little bit more. And for VCU, this is a nice upside get for them. Even if he doesn't turn out to be the player that they need him to be or anything like that, this is a VCU team that has really done a great job here in the transfer portal over the last few weeks, and I've loved everything that they've done here in the offseason, being able to bring in a guy in Phil Martelli Jr. that is able to bring over his father, father to be able to give him a little bit of wisdom as he takes this big-time job. And additionally, with VCU, they do inherit a few of those Bryant players, and Barry Evans being the main of them, as he was a nice, versatile piece over on Bryant last season. They're bringing in Keyshawn Mitchell as well. They were able to get a nice upside get as well with Lazar Djokovic, who comes on over from Charleston. They were able to retain a few guys like Brandon Jennings in the offseason as well. You bring in Tyrell Ward, who was over at LSU, and man, I really like the team. JD and Tracy, who was at Oregon last season as well. Very, very good haul for VCU, and this is just another cherry on top of it. If you're able to get something out of DeMont, great. If not, you've got more than enough production to take this sort of a swing. Julius Rollins, he last season was over at Western Illinois and was rock solid over at Western Illinois. 6'7", little bit of a stretch wing who was able to give you 9.5 points, 4.5 boards per contest. He has decided that he is going to be going to Denver. Denver was one of those teams that went the Division II route with regards to their coaching search, which I absolutely love. Rollins is an okay three-point shooter. Not amazing, but shot about 32% from three-point range. A guy that's able to space out the floor a little bit. Began his career over at Kent State where he wasn't able to see a whole heck of a lot of playing time, but as a 6'7", little bit of a combo player, being able to step into the Summit League Conference, I think that with the lack of defense that we see out there in the Summit League, you should be able to put up some relatively solid numbers. I do like this pickup for them, and I overall do like what Denver has been able to do here in the offseason. And then I like this one as well, as you've got Mr. Chris Parker, who was over at Villanova this last season. He was a very highly touted guy that just wasn't able to see a whole heck of a lot of minutes, but he's going to be heading out over to Central Florida, and for Central Florida, they've done a nice job here in the transfer portal as well. You get a nice little bit of a 6'9" joker player in Parker that I think can really be able to elevate the team down low, but if needed to, I think that he's got a sort of the range and the bag to be able to give you a little bit of three-point shooting as well, and then he's going to pair very well with the fact that this team did beef up in the offseason. Even with losing Mustafa Team, who was really their top rebounder last season, they've done a nice job bringing in Jeremy Fomina, who was over at Mississippi State last season. He's a nice rock-solid big man. He actually pairs up with his teammate Riley Kugel. John Bull is a 7'2" big man that is able to space out the floor. He's going to do a nice job down low. And then you bring in Jordan Burks, who I think has some upside coming over from Georgetown. Camilo Pacheco was able to shoot about 45% from three-point range over at Mount St. Mary's last season. George Beal Jr. was one of the better sharpshooters out there in the Coastal Conference over at Hampton. So this is a very complete class right here from Central Florida. I think that there's a chance that they can be able to get back to prominence. Really liking that move right there. And then I like this one. Terrence Gunyard. He was over at UT Martin last season, averaging 16.5 points, 4.5 boards, about 1.3 steals per contest, a mid-30s three-point shooter. He's heading on over to Duquesne, and Duquesne has had a good last 48 or so hours in the transfer portal. And it's a Duquesne team that has been a little bit hit or miss in the way that they've been able to approach the portal over the last few seasons, but I really like what they're putting together right now because they bring in this gentleman who I think is going to be able to elevate that backcourt big time. They were just missing really a shot creator last season. You didn't necessarily have that main guy. They also bring in Steph Van Bussel, who is a 6'10", little bit of stretch player over at College of Charleston last season. They already brought in John Hughley, so I do think that this Duquesne team, even though they don't necessarily have like the highest amount of, shall we say, volume of transfers, they're bringing in quality transfers, and those quality transfers I think is very big for this program. So absolutely love that one. And I do like this one as well. Louis Jordan. He was over at UMBC last season. He was able to log about 7.5 points per contest. He was pretty efficient from three-point range as well. He's going to be going on over to Radford. For Radford, it's been a little bit of a mixed bag for them the last two seasons. I do think that what is very important for Radford is for them to continue to just pound the boards because that is very much their identity and their lifeblood, but being able to bring in a guy in the backcourt like Louis Jordan, who he's stands 6'8", last year shot 48.8% from three-point range on volume. He's not like he took 1 3 per game. He took 3.9 threes per game and he shot 48.8% from three-point range. That's going to be relatively rock solid for them. And then with this Radford team, yes, they are going to be losing quite a few of the big men that were so rock solid for them from a season ago. But that said, they've done a nice job of being able to elevate that backcourt. They've got some nice, interesting mixers and shakers out there in a Big South where they are really sticking a lot of resources into their basketball teams in general. So you do love to see that. And for Radford, they've got themselves a really nice class, bringing in Brendan Rigsby, who was over at Oregon along with Minnesota the last few seasons. Dennis Parker Jr. is coming on over from NC State. That's a nice little bit of an upside get along with Del Jones as well. So what Radford has been able to put together here over the last few days, very rock solid. And then Jalen Johnson was a nice double-figure scorer over at Tennessee Tech. So I think that Radford and really that entire Big South is really starting to build a little bit of something. Jake O'Neal was a double-double machine over at Idaho State last season. 13 points, 9 boards, steal per contest. He's He's only 6'4", so he's not going to quite have the same amount of rebounding at Arizona State this upcoming season that he was over at Idaho State. But that said, they bring him in. He's a low to mid 30s 3-point shooter that's not afraid to get his nose dirty. I think that he's going to be able to do a nice job in this system. Arizona State needed a little bit more rough and tumble last year because they got completely lambasted on the boards. This should be able to provide that, so do love that pickup for them, though Arizona State still a little bit suspect in terms of what they're going to be getting down low, especially with Jaden Quantins deciding to transfer over to Kentucky here in the offseason. You've got Lindenwood transfer Ali Tukara. He was last season for Lindenwood able to give the team about 4.5 boards, a block per contest, just wasn't properly used. Only played 15 minutes per game. Lindenwood should have had him out there until the wheels fell off, in my opinion. He now goes on over to Arkansas State, and for Arkansas State, they're going to be looking to maintain that defensive identity that they were able to form under Brian Hodgson last season. Under Hodgson, he was able to do a nice job of really being able to elevate that. Now, he goes on over to South Florida. They stayed relatively in-house with regards to the coaching move, but for Arkansas State, they really did have to find a few guys in the transfer portal that really fit this system, and I mean, it's been a little bit slow going for them thus far, but it does feel like they're now really starting to be able to put together a nice roster. Having TJ Caldwell at the guard spot, I think it's going to be very big for them, and then Matt Heyman, a guy that's able to generate turnovers and a guy that's able to pop it and lock it from three, is big. Chandler Jackson, who is a starter over at Florida State last season. That's a rock solid add. Really like what this team is doing, especially with Jalen Hampton being a little bit of a Swiss Army knife and a little bit of a mixer and shaker that's able to do a nice job down low as well. So this is becoming a very complete team. Pharrell Bonaguno, he was over at Gardner-Webb this last season. He was starter for them, 8 points, 4.5 boards per contest at 6'6". Not a guy that's necessarily going to give you a ton of 3-point shooting, but he's going to be staying within the conference. He's going to be going to Winthrop. For Winthrop, I almost feel like they're getting passed by a little bit in this conference. Like for Winthrop, there was a time where they were the big bad wolf out there when they had their guy in Pat Kelsey just running some insane offense, but we have seen this team slip back to earth a little bit, and for the love of Pete, can they bring in guys that actually shoot free throws? But that said, they bring in Dallin Berry, who's a solid player over at Charleston Southern this last season. I like the Kareem Rozier pickup as well. He was over at Duquesne this last season, but just feels like they might need a little bit more of something. I feel like they might be lacking a bit of something down low as well, so I saw some question marks there, but this is a step in the right direction. I just don't know if Bonaguno is really going to be too much of an elevator for the team, but I think that this guy can be an elevator. Edison Patterson, he's a former top 150 recruit, began his career at Oregon and Nevada. Long winding road, goes down to the junior college level. Last 2 seasons spent it at Northwestern State, and last season, rock solid guy, 13 points, 5.5 boards, 3.5 assists, 1.4 steals per contest. Not a guy that's necessarily going to give you a ton of 3-point shooting, but for Eastern Michigan, a program that really needs a W, because man, it has not been great for Eastern Michigan. They're able to pick him up, and for Eastern Michigan, been a little bit slow going in the transfer portal, and I just have never really been the biggest Stan Heath stan, but that said, being able to bring in Addison Patterson is big, because the only other 2 guys that they bring in is Braylon Green, who's not bad at Bowling Green, but you're not really writing home about Braylon Green, and Mohammed Habab, he comes on over from Central Michigan. He really didn't see a lot of time down low. You needed someone like an Addison Patterson. He's able to space out the floor. They were able to trot out there the DePaul duo last season that was able to give them a little bit more offense. This is going to be able to elevate them. Now, what they put around Addison Patterson is going to be very big, because right now they don't have a lot around them, but that said, they do pick up Addison Patterson, so that's pretty rock solid. And for Eastern Michigan, they also pick up Micaiah Ellison. He was over at Stetson this last season. This guy was rock solid, 14.5 points, 2.5 assists per contest. That is a big time pickup for them, along with MacMan Seal. MacMan Seal comes off the board. He's going to be going to Eastern Michigan as well, after he last season was limited, only 12 games, but as a freshman, he was able to give the team about 11 points per contest, shot in the mid-30s from 3-point range. Those 3 guys for Eastern Michigan all coming off the board at the same time, that is very big. Up until yesterday, they were really doing a big giant nothing burger. Now we know what this team is going to be looking like a little bit more, and being able to have those 2 guards, being able to have a guy in Patterson that's able to do a little bit of everything, really do like this last 24 hours for Eastern Michigan. So they elevated a MAC that, let's call it what it is, over the last few seasons just hasn't been the same level of talent that we've seen in past years. Malik Presley has entered the building over at George Mason, as he was over at Texas this last season, just was not able to see the floor with Texas, as he redshirted, actually began his career over at Vanderbilt, and while he was over at Vanderbilt, was not able to see the floor too much, was only averaging about 2 points per contest, was a pretty highly touted recruit coming out of high school. I know that doesn't sound significant that he was the number 16 recruit in the state of Texas, but 247 Sports rated him as a top 175 guy for George Mason. This has been a unit that has had a really, really good offseason as well. You just take a look at the talent that they and so many of these other teams out there in the Atlantic 10 are bringing in. And chef kiss. Dole Bio was a nice rock-solid rebounder over at Mount St. Mary's. You've got a guy in Riley Allenpatch who at 6'11" is able to pop it from three-point range. Jamari Hill's not necessarily the greatest three-point shooter, but he's able to give you scoring on a dime. Corey Mincy was the top scorer over at Presbyterian. Jakari Long is a guy that was on that Maryland team that made the Sweet 16 last season. Really like the direction that George Mason is heading in. They were rock solid on defense last year, left a little bit of something to be desired on offense, but I do think that offensive game is going to be picking up a little bit as well. Northern Arizona, the Lumberjacks bring in Isaiah Shaw. He last season over at Valparaiso was able to supply the team with about 5 points per contest. A little bit of a mixer and shaker at 6'8". He began his career over at Grand Canyon where he just wasn't able to see the floor at all for them. And for Isaiah Shaw, this is not going to be mistaken with some guy that's going to completely light you up and give you the world's most versatility or anything like that. But I do think that all in all, this is a relatively solid pickup. Shot about 32% from three-point range. It felt like he was getting more and more comfortable as the season went along as well. So I do think that this is a guy that should be able to see some starters minutes, should be able to elevate this roster a little bit. Now for Northern Arizona, losing the likes of Carson Towton Company from a season ago, that is something that is going to be very, very rough for them. But overall, I do think that that's a good pickup as well. And Devin Cambridge, he is now the Van Wilder of college basketball. According to @portal_updates, he's going to be granted a 7th year of eligibility. He played 14 games the last 2 seasons over at Texas Tech, played over at Arizona State. I believe that he began his career over at Auburn. I would not doubt it if he played at some point for the Harlem Globetrotters as well. So he's going to be back in the fold, and he's now in the transfer portal, ladies and gentlemen. So yeah, that's where things are heading there. We've been talking about it on the podcast last few days. Malik Thomas, guy that has spent about 500 years in college basketball as well after he was at the Dons of San Francisco last season. He's now available to play for any team that he wants to as well. And then you've got Jaden Smith. He was over at Fordham this last season. He is going to be going to St. Joe's. St. Joe's hoping to not be average Joe's this season. As for Mr. Smith, only about 3 points, 2.5 rebounds per game at Fordham. He's got a really nice frame. This is very much an upside get. You don't know what you're going to be able to get in terms of just like secure talent or anything like that, but it's a little bit of a swinging of the fences for a St. Joe's team that was very good on the glass last season. And for St. Joe's, I do think that his program in general just continues to head in the right direction. Recognize that they lose a lot of those backcourt pieces from a season ago, but I do like this pickup for them. And it's a St. Joe's unit that they haven't brought in like a high volume amount of transfers or anything like that, but it does feel like they're getting it right here on the transfer portal. And I do think that bringing in Al Amidu from Marquette, that was a relatively nice swing. Deuce Jones, he was over at LaSalle this last season. He was able to put up some solid numbers over there. I do like what St. Joseph's been able to do, and even though they're not necessarily bringing in the most splashy guys, they're bringing guys that I think are very good fits with them, and hopefully this podcast is a good fit for you because we're looking at college basketball every single day here in the regular season and the offseason. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Go Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUDit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And big thanks once again to our good friend Lukas Harkins, who joined me in last segment. I'm coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So that means I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.